Chapter 8, Lesson 2, Creating the Constitution. Main idea. The states sent delegates to a convention to solve the problems of the Articles of Confederation. One American story. On May 15, 1787, Virginia Governor Edmund Randolph arrived in Philadelphia. The young nation faced lawlessness as Shays' Rebellion had shown. Now delegates from throughout the states were coming to Philadelphia to discuss reforming the government. Early in the convention, Randolph rose to speak. A voice from the past. Let us not be afraid to view with a steady eye the dangers with which we are surrounded. Are we not on the eve of a civil war, which is only to be prevented by the hopes from this convention? By Edmund Randolph, quoted in Edmund Randolph, a biography. Over the next 4 months, the delegates debated how best to keep the United States from falling apart. In this section, you will read about the Convention of 1787 and the creation of the U.S. Constitution. A constitutional convention is called. In 1786, a series of events began that would eventually lead to a new form of government for the United States. In September of that year, delegates from 5 states met in Annapolis, Maryland, to discuss ways to promote trade among their states. At the time, most states placed high taxes on goods from other states. The delegates believed that creating national trade laws would help the economies of all the states. Making such changes required amending the Articles of Confederation because the national government had been granted no power to regulate trade among the states. The Annapolis delegates, led by Alexander Hamilton of New York, called for the states to send representatives to Philadelphia the following May to discuss such changes. At first, many Americans doubted that the national government needed strengthening, but news of Shays' Rebellion in the late 1786 and early 1787 quickly changed many people's minds. Fearing that rebellion might spread, 12 states sent delegates to the meeting in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. Only Rhode Island refused to participate. The convention's delegates. The 55 delegates to the Constitutional Convention, as the Philadelphia meeting became known, were a very impressive group. About half were lawyers. Others were planters, merchants, and doctors. 3/4 of them had been representatives in the Continental Congress. Many had been members of their state legislatures and had helped write their state constitutions. Along with other leaders of the time, these delegates are called the founders or founding fathers of the United States. America's most famous men were at the Constitutional Convention. George Washington, the hero of the Revolution, came out of retirement for the meeting. Benjamin Franklin, the most famous scientist and statesman, lent his wit and wisdom to the convention. One of the ablest delegates was James Madison. Madison had read more than 100 books on government in preparation for the meeting. When Thomas Jefferson, serving as ambassador to France, read the list of delegates, he wrote, "It is really an assembly of demigods." Not everyone was at the Constitutional Convention. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were overseas at their diplomatic posts, but they wrote home to encourage the delegates. Others had a less positive outlook on the convention. For example, Patrick Henry, who had been elected as a delegate from Virginia, refused to attend. He said he smelled a rat in Philadelphia, tending toward monarchy. Also, the convention did not reflect the diverse U.S. population of the 1780s. There were no Native Americans, African Americans, or women among the delegates. The nation's early leaders did not consider these groups of people to be citizens and did not invite any of them to attend. However, the framework of government the founders established is the very one that would eventually provide full rights and responsibilities to all Americans. The Delegates Assemble. Most of the delegates arrived at the Constitutional Convention without a clear idea of what to expect. Some thought they would only draft amendments to their Articles of Confederation. Others thought they would design an entirely new plan for the government. But they all agreed that the government should protect people's rights. Back in 1776, many Americans thought that the government was a main threat to people's rights. But by 1787, many realized that people often came into conflict and needed a government that could maintain order. As a result, the government had to be strong enough to protect people's rights, but not too strong to be controlled. Madison later wrote about this problem. A voice from the past. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and then in the next place oblige the government to control itself. From James Madison, The Federalist, No. 51. This was the challenge that faced the delegates: how to set up a strong but limited federal government. Some, such as Gouverneur Morris of New York, wanted the upper class to control the government. Others, such as James Wilson of Pennsylvania, favored a direct democracy open to more people. By May 25, 1787, at least 2 delegates from each of 7 states had arrived in Philadelphia. With 29 delegates in attendance, the convention was officially underway. James Madison, 1751 to 1836. James Madison was a short, soft-spoken man, but he may have made the greatest contribution of any of the founders at the Constitutional Convention. He took thorough notes of the convention's proceedings. His notes are the most detailed picture we have of the debates and drama of the convention. But Madison did not just observe the convention. He was perhaps the most important participant. One of the other delegates called him the best-informed man of any point in debate. Madison was so important that he earned the title Father of the Constitution. The convention begins. The first order of business was to elect a president for the convention. Robert Morris of Pennsylvania nominated George Washington. Every delegate voted for him. Washington's quiet and dignified leadership set a solemn and serious tone for the convention. At their next meeting, the delegates decided on the rules for the convention. They wanted to be able to consider all ideas and to be able to change sides in any debate. They did not want to be pressured by the politics of the day. For these reasons, they decided that their discussions would remain secret. To ensure privacy, the windows in their meeting room were kept shut even though it was summer. Guards were posted outside the door. With the secrecy rule approved, they got down to business. The Virginia Plan. On May 29, the delegates began the real work of designing a new national government. Presiding over the convention, George Washington recognized Edmund Randolph as the first speaker. Randolph offered a plan for a whole new government. The plan became known as the Virginia Plan. Madison, Randolph, and the other Virginia delegates had drawn up the plan while they waited for the convention to open. The Virginia Plan proposed a government that would have 3 branches. The first branch of government was the legislature, which made the laws. The second branch was the executive, which enforced the laws. The third branch was the judiciary, which interpreted the laws. The Virginia Plan proposed a legislature with 2 houses. In both houses, the number of representatives from each state would be based on the state's population or its wealth. The legislature would have the power to levy taxes, regulate commerce, and make laws in all cases where the separate states are incompetent or unable. The Virginia Plan led to weeks of debate. Because they had larger populations, larger states supported the plan. It would give them greater representation in the legislature. The smaller states opposed this plan. They worried that the larger states would end up ruling the others. Delaware delegate John Dickinson voiced the concerns of the small states. A voice from the past. Some of the members from the small states wish for 2 branches in the general legislature and are friends to a good national government. But we would sooner submit to a foreign power than submit to be deprived, in both branches of the legislature, of an equal suffrage, and thereby be thrown under the dominion of the larger states. By John Dickinson, quoted in Mr. Madison's Constitution. The Great Compromise. In response to the Virginia plan, New Jersey delegate William Patterson presented an alternative on June 15. The New Jersey plan called for a legislature with only one house. In it, each state would have one vote. In providing equal representation to each state, the New Jersey plan was similar to the Articles of Confederation. Even though the New Jersey plan gave the legislature the power to regulate trade and to raise money by taxing foreign goods, it did not offer the broad powers proposed by the Virginia plan. The delegates voted on these two plans on June 19. The Virginia plan won and became the framework for drafting the Constitution. During the rest of June, the delegates argued over representation in the legislature. Emotions ran high as the delegates struggled for a solution. In desperation, the delegates selected a committee to work out a compromise in early July. The committee offered the Great Compromise. To satisfy the smaller states, each state would have an equal number of votes in the Senate. To satisfy the larger states, the committee set representation in the House of Representatives according to state populations. More than a week of arguing followed the introduction of the plan, but on July 16, 1787, the convention passed it. The Great Compromise. Virginia plan. The legislative branch would have two houses. Both houses in the legislature would assign representatives according to state population or wealth. New Jersey plan. The legislature would have one house. Each state would have one vote in the legislature. The Great Compromise. The legislature would have two houses. The Senate would give each state equal representation. The House of Representatives would have representation according to state population. Slavery and the Constitution. Because representation in the House of Representatives would be based on the population of each state, the delegates had to decide who would be counted in that population. The southern states had many more slaves than the northern states. Southerners wanted the slaves to be counted as part of general population for representation, but not for taxation. Northerners argued that slaves were not citizens and should not be counted for representation, but should be counted for taxation. On this issue, the delegates reached another compromise, known as the 3/5 Compromise. Under this compromise, 3/5 of the slave population would be counted when setting direct taxes on the states. This 3/5 ratio also would be used to determine representation in the legislature. The delegates had another heated debate about the slave trade. Slavery had already been outlawed in several northern states. All of the northern states and several of the southern states had banned the importation of slaves. Many northerners wanted to see this ban extended to the rest of the nation, but southern slaveholders strongly disagreed. The delegates from South Carolina and Georgia stated that they would never accept any plan unless their right to import slaves be untouched. Again, the delegates settled on a compromise. On August 29, they agreed that Congress could not ban the slave trade until 1808. Regulating trade. Aside from delaying any ban on the slave trade, the Constitution placed few limits on Congress's power to regulate commerce. Most delegates were glad that Congress would regulate and even promote commerce. After all, commercial problems were the main cause of the Annapolis Convention in 1786. Southerners, however, succeeded in banning Congress from taxing exports because Southern economies depended on exports. The Constitution also gave Congress sole power to coin money. Congress could issue money under the Articles of Confederation, but so could the states, which led to economic conflicts. The Articles of Confederation granted Congress and the states the power to make treaties with Native Americans, and this power was granted exclusively to Congress under the Constitution's Commerce Clause. But the status of Native Americans under the Constitution remained hazy. They were not citizens, nor were they considered foreign nations. The Constitutional Convention continued to meet into September. On September 15, 1787, the delegates voted their support for the Constitution in its final form. All but 3 delegates signed the Constitution. It was then sent to the Confederation Congress, which sent it to the states for ratification or approval. In the next section, you will read about the debate over ratification.